At first glance, what you see on this screen might look like just an ice-covered, deserted, and insignificant island. However, this ice mass is at the very center of a debate that has recently flared up again, particularly in the United States. With Donald Trump's return to the presidency, Greenland has once again captured the world's attention. So why? Why is Trump so obsessed with this island that almost nobody cares about on maps? Let's take a short journey through history today and examine why Greenland is important to America. There are no well-documented written sources about Greenland, but research has revealed traces of life dating back to 2500 BC. The Eskimo people, also known as the Inuit, are the indigenous inhabitants of this island. However, because 80% of the island is covered in ice, living conditions are extremely difficult, and over time the Inuit have been forced to migrate westward towards Canada and America. Between the 7th and 8th centuries, Viking communities in Scandinavian regions such as Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland realized they were lagging behind the rest of the world in harvesting and agriculture, and they organized voyages by ship to explore new land. At that time, the great Norwegian seafarer Gunnbjorn Ulfsson also wanted to participate in these expeditions and decided to launch a voyage from Norway with his ship. This was a turning point in history. Ulfsson was caught in a storm during the expedition, and the storm miraculously carried him to Greenland.
Skipverjar, herðið seglin! Allir á sína stað, stór bylgja kemur!
Following Ulfsson's successful expedition, another curious Norwegian sailor, Erik the Red, unlike Ulfsson, brought some 700 people from Iceland and colonized the area. In subsequent years, the mass migration initiated by Erik Red became quite attractive to Scandinavian communities, and with the influx of immigrants, Greenland's population began to increase. Because 80% of the island is covered in ice, habitable areas are limited to settlements in the central, western, and eastern parts. 500 years before Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci, two Icelandic sailors, Herjolfsson and Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, attempted to explore northern Greenland, but their ship was caught in a storm, leading them to discover Newfoundland in North America. They established a small colony there, which they named Vinland, but due to difficulties with the native population and a lack of support from the Greenlandic mainland, they were unable to establish themselves and eventually left. Erik the Red was the first person to discover Greenland after Ulfsson. But unlike Ulfsson, he established civilization and settlements in Greenland. His death in 1003 did not stop migrations to Greenland. He himself was a non-theist, meaning he did not believe in any god, but his son, Leif Erikson, was a Catholic Christian and, after his father's death, brought a priest to the island, taking the first step towards Christianity in Greenland.
Þetta land skal verða ný heim Normanna, faðir, og þessir menn munu taka við hvítum Kristi.
Með Guðs náð, Leif, Grænland mun verða kristnit land.
By 1050, a large migration began from present-day Alaska. The Thule and Inuit, relatives of the Inuit, the island's original inhabitants, migrated again to the central part of Greenland, to the glaciers. Of course, migration is not limited to a society moving from one geographical area to another. The migration of the Eskimos to Greenland created a revolution for the island. They brought cultural riches, such as the articulated harpoon for hunting, the culture and trade of fur trading, and sled dogs for transportation. A significant portion of their food needs shifted from land to sea routes. The population increased along with the trade activities brought by the Inuit. In the 14th century, trade flourished in Greenland with the arrival of trading ships from Scandinavia. The Inuit exported goods such as walrus tusks, sealskin, sheepskins, cowhides, and ropes to Europe on these ships, while their Scandinavian counterparts bought and sold goods such as raw iron, ironworks, timber, and carpentry products. The Inuit, who had older roots on the island than the Viking communities, became a prosperous society in a mutually beneficial relationship with the Scandinavians after Erik the Red's colonial activities. While everything was going well in Greenland in the 14th century, greedy European colonialism was not resting. The proxy war between the Kingdom of Norway and the Kingdom of Sweden spilled over into Greenland, and in 1320, Greenland was officially annexed to the Kingdom of Sweden, but this did not prevent Greenland from becoming a prosperous society. At that time, the Swedish king Magnus IV Sigurdsson had also brought the kingdoms of Iceland and Norway under his rule. King Magnus sent a small contingent to Greenland as a symbolic gesture, but this was not a show of force or a threat. On the contrary, Greenland continued to prosper under Swedish rule throughout his reign. This continued until the global climate crisis known as the Little Ice Age in the 15th century, which temporarily but devastatingly disrupted trade in Greenland. This climate crisis became a period of stagnation and even decline for Greenland, severely disrupting sea routes, affecting maritime trade, and consequently leading to a decrease in the Greenlandic population. This geographical event, known as the impact of climate on population, shook the order that Eric the Red had established in Greenland. The central and western settlements literally melted away, leaving only the eastern settlement area, and this was a struggle for survival for Greenland. On June 17, 1397, Denmark became involved in proxy wars, defeating the Kingdom of Sweden and embarking on an expansionist movement in Scandinavia. This gave birth to the entity known as the Kalmar Confederation. This powerful confederation, encompassing Sweden, Norway, parts of Finland, and all of Iceland, also claimed Greenland. Thus, relations between Denmark and Greenland began thanks to the Kalmar Union. Over time, the Black Death epidemic, which originated in Europe, spread to Greenland due to maritime trade. Greenland, having just emerged from a crisis like the Little Ice Age, and having completely lost 2 of its settlements, now had to contend with one of the most devastating and intractable problems of the time, the Black Death. Half of its population perished from this disease. Between 1500 and 1504, the Scandinavian people in eastern settlements who had survived the Little Ice Age climate crisis and the Black Death migrated entirely back to their homeland, Scandinavia, by ship. With the Scandinavians completely leaving the island, the Inuit, who were more accustomed to the cold weather and harsh living conditions, migrated south and filled the abandoned eastern settlement. With the dissolution of the Kalmar Union in the 16th century, Sweden and Denmark became 2 separate kingdoms, while Greenland and Iceland remained part of Denmark. In the 18th century, frequent voyages of Danish sailors around the island for whaling and various activities led to a resurgence in the island's population and the establishment of new settlements. With the intensification of colonialism in the world during the 19th century, the British, Dutch, Portuguese, and Spanish fleets set their sights on the island. But the naval force deployed by the Kingdom of Denmark thwarted them all. The Napoleonic Wars completely altered the balance of power in Europe, and Denmark was affected by this change, being forced to cede Norwegian territory to Sweden. The French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, which erupted in Europe, brought with them movements for democracy, human rights, and nationalism, affecting Greenland as well as the rest of the world. And in 1862 to 1863, Greenland held its first democratic elections. That same year, the city of Nuuk was chosen as the capital. Although Greenland attracted the attention of the United States from the beginning of World War I, 1914 to 1918, the U.S. was unable to focus its attention there during this period. Maintaining a completely neutral and quiet policy, Greenland was not invaded. However, with the Nazi occupation of Denmark and Norway during World War II, the British also occupied Iceland. Although America initially claimed neutrality at the beginning of the war, it invaded Greenland in April 1941 under the pretext of securing Atlantic shipping lanes, a region that had whetted its appetite since World War I. Greenland's strategic location was invaluable. The U.S. established a naval base in the southern part of the island and 2 air bases in the northern part. In response, the Nazis launched operations on the east coast and established 4 air bases. Numerous battles were fought on the island between the Americans and the Germans. German forces withdrew from the island shortly before Hitler's suicide in 1945 and the defeat of the Nazis in the war. From 1945 onwards, Greenland maintained its importance throughout the Cold War. This was because, in the event that nuclear tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States escalated into war, Greenland's location was ideal for the U.S. to easily target the Soviets. Its value between 1945 and 1991 lay in its ideal location for intercontinental ballistic missiles and its role as a port and base for dominance of the Atlantic Ocean. But its value today is not limited to these factors. So why is Greenland, with its population of 60,000 today, of particular interest to the United States and Donald Trump? At its core, there is a more critical issue than one might think: water. While the world is rapidly heading towards water scarcity, Greenland holds enormous freshwater reserves within its glaciers. Of course, taking and using this water is not as easy as it sounds. Melting the glaciers, dealing with harmful bacteria within them, and purification processes present serious technical challenges. However, Trump's perspective is focused more on the future than the present. In addition to water, Greenland is a key point in the global balance of power due to its oil, rare earth minerals, and strategic location in the Arctic. In other words, Greenland is not just an ice-covered island. It is a very valuable square in the geopolitical chess game of the 21st century. Of course, we can't forget the threats from China, the rising star of Asia, and Russia, whose greed is never enough. The U.S., in order to maintain its stability and power, must also consider the 52 billion barrels of oil reserves and rare earth elements already located in Greenland. Greenland, still under Danish rule, established its own government and flag in 1985. In 2008, a referendum replaced Danish as the official language with Greenlandic. While the desire for independence remains dominant, Greenland continues to be a potential target for the U.S. In short, Donald Trump sees Greenland as a potential target for water in the long term and for oil, rare earth elements, and geopolitical advantage in the short term. It's difficult to predict who will be the next target on Trump's list, but the uncontrolled increase in the world's population and the proportionally dwindling world resources are driving humanity towards irreversible catastrophe and playing a critical role in the outbreak of World War III. I hope you enjoyed and found the video informative. Don't forget to subscribe and like for the next video. Have a good day, Steel and Glory enthusiasts.